Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. As they would say in Shona, you have to listen to this to believe it for yourself. This is a video of, I think he's an American preacher, talking about black leadership. I can't believe it, but here we are. Listen to this.
You know, people ask me many times, why are third world leaders corrupt? I mean, every country in Africa has leadership problems. Every country in the Caribbean has leadership problems. You know why? It's simple. I figured it out. It's very simple. Why are there so many lack of great leaders in your country among black African people? Or even Mexicans, the Asian people? Why is there such lack of leadership in these formerly oppressed countries? Here's why. Because the oppressor did not do what Jesus said. He made sure you never knew what he knew. Now, these are very interesting people, you know. They're interesting. Here's what they do. They say, okay, we ain't going to teach you nothing that we know. So all we're going to teach you is how to grow cane and cotton. Pick cotton, that's all you have to do. Go get water. That's it. You don't need to know anything else, they say. And so for 294 years, you become an expert cotton picker, an excellent cane cutter. But the problem is, he doesn't teach you how to make the cane into sugar. He doesn't teach you how to turn the cotton into cloth. He keeps that to himself. After a while, you become unruly because you multiply. And so you tell him, there's more of us than you. We're going to kill you if you don't let us go. So he does something very simple. Every single situation is the same. He said, okay, I don't want to fight you. I don't want to fight you. Tell you what, you could have the cotton field and you could have the cane because I don't want to fight you. I'm gone. And he leaves. So here you are. You call yourself free now because you got a cotton field and a cane. The problem is he trained you to wear clothes and to drink tea with sugar. You didn't hear what I just said. That's too deep. He conditioned you to wear his clothes and to drink tea with sugar. And he leaves you with a sugar cane field and a lot of cotton. Sharp guy. They're smart. After a few years, you begin to realize, I can't wear cotton and I can't put cane in tea. So he comes back and he says, what's your problem? You say, look, I can't turn cotton into cloth. He said, okay, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy the cotton from you at my price because you can't use it. So you can't set the price because you can't use it. I'll tell you how much I'm going to buy it from you for. I'll buy the cane, you cut it at my price. So they take it away and they turn it into cloth and sugar. Then they come back to you and they sell you the sugar at their price and the cloth at their price. And here you are now, instead of being directly oppressed, you are economically oppressed. They didn't train you to be producers. And now you thought you were free. So the kind of seminars I have is the seminars that help you learn how to make sugar. The kind of work I do is to teach you how to turn cotton into cloth. So that you become free to get your farms back and know how to convert cotton into cloth. And instead of just being consumers, you become producers. This is leadership. So what they do is they don't teach you how to lead. They don't teach you how to operate anything. And then when they leave you, they say, take charge. So here's the African guy in Ghana, the British is gone, and they never teach him how to be a leader like them. And he got power, he got all this country, he got this, but he ain't got no training. And so we have a slave wearing a crown. Woe to the land when a slave becomes king. Words of Solomon. Now, what I think is unfair is that they come back later and say, see, you can't rule. I told you, you ain't born to rule. Look how you messed up your country. Corruption, abuse, you know, and this. And what they don't know is that they are the blame. They never trained me. You don't understand what I'm talking about. How can you set me up to fail and then tell me I failed? Oh, come on, clap. You get what I'm talking about. If we got to get this right, you don't prepare me for failure and then say, I failed. I blame you for my failure because you never trained me to be a leader. It is enough for the teacher to make the student just like him. I guess you could say, my conclusion is, and I say this to all the governments I work with, the failure of third world countries is evidence of the failure of the colonial powers. They must take the blame. And that's why I am traveling every week to a third world country, sitting with parliaments and congresses and heads of state, and I lock them up for 3 days. Why? I got to correct what those leaders never did. I have to somehow solve 200 years of history in 2 days. That's a lot of hard work, but we have to. Your problem is.
There we have it. I can't believe it. I really cannot believe. Zimbabwe used to be the breadbasket of the region of Southern Africa. We lost that position in 2000 onwards. Are we saying here that we've been failing to produce maize and grow fruits for our own product, for our own consumption, because the whites didn't teach us? Unbelievable. This is simply unbelievable. Zimbabwe has just had an election last year, which Zanu PF once again rigged, marking 43 years after independence, and we still can't run free, fair, and credible elections. Something we really must be ashamed of. But instead of putting our heads up and saying that we have failed ourselves, we're blaming the whites. Are we saying here that Nelson Chamisa, Morgan Tsvangirai, and all the MDC friends, and their MDC and Triple C friends, who have failed to implement even one token reform in 23 years, 5 of which were in the GNU, which, if they had implemented them, would have stopped Zanu PF rigging the elections? Are we saying they failed to do it because they needed the whites to teach them what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections? Of course not. This is absolutely, utterly stupid. When are we ever going to take responsibility and saying we failed ourselves? I think there is this deep-rooted inferiority complex in some blacks that they would never, ever accept that they are masters in their own house. And when things fail, they take ownership of the failure or the success. They could find somebody else to blame for it. It could be the ancestral spirits. It could be God. Or the most common one, the colonial masters. I can't believe here is somebody of stature going around boasting that is going around in black countries and telling them that Africa's problems are caused by the whites because they didn't teach us. 2,500 years ago, the Greeks came up with democracy, the government of the people, by the people, for the people. It worked very well for them. The Greeks had their golden age. Some of the great works of art came out during that period. Some of the great structures, buildings were built during that period, 2,500 years ago. We are not being asked to reinvent the wheel. We are not being asked to reinvent democracy. All we are being asked is to apply it. 2,500 years later, with all the benefit of all that human history, and we are failing to do so. And we are finding somebody else to blame for it. The wise should have taught us. So who taught the Greeks 2,500 years ago? I think one of the problems we have in Africa is failure to take responsibility for our own, to be masters in our own house, to be masters of our own destiny, to always look for somebody else to blame for our unbelievable stupidity. There is it's not rocket science that MDC leaders had the golden opportunity these last 23 years to implement the democratic reforms which would have stopped Zanu PF rigging the elections. It's not rocket science at all. Why they didn't do it? Because they are corrupt and incompetent. And somehow we don't want to admit it. So we want to blame the colonialists. During the fight for independence, one of the pillars of the struggle was one man, one rule. One man, one vote. The promise of a meaningful say in the governance of the country. And yet, before we even held our first elections in 1980, Robert Mugabe and these Zanu PF cronies had already figured it out that they wanted to have absolute power. And if they are going to allow the ordinary people a meaningful vote, they could lose power. So they came up with an excuse that if Zanu PF does not win the elections, the Bush War would continue. Because we don't trust the British to hold free, fair, and credible elections. That was their excuse. Well, the people voted to end the Bush War. Robert Mugabe found himself in power. And as soon as he got his feet under the desk, he started consolidating his hold on power. By 1983, 3 years after independence, the country found itself being dragged into this Kukurahundi massacre. The primary purpose of Kukurahundi was to force Zanu PF's main political rival, PF Zapu, to give up their political power, force them to join Zanu PF, which they finally did in 1987, clearing the way for the de facto one-party state. The 1985 elections were held in the middle of the Kukurahundi War, so they couldn't possibly have been free, fair, and credible. The 1990 elections were not free, fair, and credible because Zanu PF now was using the excuse that multi-party democracy was threatening the unity that had been achieved between ZAPU and Zanu PF. Just another excuse for denying people their meaningful vote. This is exactly what has happened all along these last 43 years. The opportunity to end Zanu PF dictatorship was there. The people realized that if we can elect an opposition that will implement the democratic reforms, force Zanu PF to hold free, fair, and credible elections, we will end the dictatorship. Tsvangirai, when he launched his MDC, was launched on the back of the movement to implement democratic change in Zimbabwe. And their party copied that name, Movement for Democratic Change. And yet our friends have been in power, in opposition, for 23 years now, including the 5 in the GNU. And they've not implemented even one token reform. This is where we are. Are we going to blame the British for MDC's failure to implement even one token reform? What about us, the ordinary people? Why have we said nothing about it all these last 23 years? We can't even appreciate that the primary purpose of the MDC was to implement the reforms. And after 23 years and not even a token reform implemented, we can't even acknowledge it ourselves. Who are we going to blame for it? The British? We really need to wake up. This culture that has been cultivated by leaders like Robert Mugabe of blaming the colonial powers for all our problems. We've got to snap out of it. When Zimbabwe became independent in 1980, we became masters of our own house. We must have the courage to look at what we are doing and be able to say, yeah, we got it right. No, we got it wrong. And change accordingly. We do not need the British to have taught us anything. We could have learned it ourselves. We did not need the British to have taught us how to farm, to stop destroying Zimbabwe's rich agricultural heritage. We know why Zimbabwe's agricultural sector collapsed. Robert Mugabe seized most of the farms to give them to his cronies. His daughter, the world learned last year that she has got 21 farms. The total acreage of those 21 farms is the size of Belgium, a whole country. How many of those farms are being used productively? That is another matter. Most of that land is lying idle. This is what has killed Zimbabwe's agricultural sector. Greed. People seizing farms and failing to put them to good use. We don't need the West to tell us that we are being wasteful. We don't need anybody to tell us that Mnangagwa and his cronies are looting the country's gold, diamonds, and other resources. We already know that. What we need is to have the courage to say, this is not right. Let's put it this right. We didn't need the rest of the world to tell us that Mnangagwa rigged the 2023 elections. This time, even our own regional body, SADC, confirmed that. The continental body, AU, confirmed that the elections were rigged. But they found themselves in a situation where they could not even take action against Zanu PF because our own opposition, we had insisted in participating in those flawed elections. All could not wait to take up their gravity seats, even when they'd been told those elections were flawed. So if we Zimbabweans are happy with flawed elections, why should SADC be concerned about it? We need to wake up as a nation, as a people, and be masters in our own house. We are, whether we like it or not, independent. And blaming somebody else is not going to get us out of this mess. Right now, the most important thing we need to accept is that the opposition, who were elected for the primary reason of implementing the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections, have been participating in flawed elections only to give Zanu PF legitimacy. That is the serious problem we are facing. It's not going to go away. We need to face it. We need to deal with it. We need to accept that Nelson Chamisa and company will never, ever implement any meaningful democratic reform. If we want free, fair, and credible elections, we have to find competent men and women who will implement the reforms. Zanu PF is not going to reform itself out of power. And Zanu PF is quite content with the present arrangement, where we have got a corrupt, incompetent, and utterly useless opposition party. But as long as they participate and give the regime some modicum of legitimacy, the regime is not going to complain about it. Zanu PF will be quite happy to go through the 2028 elections and have a rerun of the 2023 elections, where the opposition participate adamant that they are going to win big. Only for Zanu PF to win the elections, and the opposition to go back and make a big song and dance of how Zanu PF had rigged the elections when it's already too late. to do anything about it. Ever since the end of the 2023 elections, the opposition has been fighting among themselves. This recall of opposition MPs is playing exactly, it suits Zanu PF. It's not serving the nation any good at all. And if history is anything to go by, because in 2019, when the opposition started fighting among themselves as a result of the MDC alliance, the High Court judging that the MDC alliance leadership Chamisa, who had seized power after Morgan Tsvangirai's death, was illegal. That started a fight among the opposition, where for the rest of the 4 years to 2023, the opposition were doing nothing else but fighting among themselves. The fighting has already started in the opposition. And at this rate, I think we can confidently say come 2028, they will still be fighting among themselves. And so Zanu PF will go ahead and rig the 2028 elections. And so the dictatorship will continue. We want to be masters of our own destiny. We want to be masters in our own house. Then we have got to take responsibility. We have got to look at what is happening and saying this is not right, and not look for somebody else to blame, and fight to put it right. At the present moment, the number one priority for Zimbabwe is that we have got a competent opposition that will implement the reforms to make sure that 2028 elections are free, fair, and credible. Nelson Chamisa and company will never, ever implement even one token reform. Mark my word. I repeat, we need a competent opposition to implement the democratic reforms so that we have free, fair, and credible elections. That is the only sure way of getting out of this mess. Nelson Chamisa, even if he forms his new party, will never ever implement even one token reform. They had the opportunity to do so, particularly during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. They failed to implement even one reform. And ever since, they've been participating in flawed elections out of greed. That is the reality that we must face. That is the reality that we must address and resolve. Thank you very much, and good night.